All good.
Firstly, thank you very much for attending both in person and online for this second in our three seminar series. My name's John Prins and I'm the Executive Director of Health Translation Queensland. Firstly, as always, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which we all sited at the moment, and to pay respects to elders past, present and emerging, and certainly value the contribution of our Indigenous friends to science in general and health also. Thanks also to our sponsors, Moderna, IP Group and QUT, for helping us to provide the IT for this series. Particularly, we're running a Q&A, we'll have a Q&A available on our websites, and a video of the three seminars is available on YouTube. Well, only one so far, but eventually all three. And I'm pleased to say we've already had over 100 hits on our first seminar series. So that's terrific. So a quick advertorial for and I apologise for those to those who have heard this, but Health Translation Queensland is a research translation centre accredited by NHMRC, and these are our partners, 13. And as you can see, collectively, enormous expertise and grunt, including over $50 billion collective revenue. So we're in the fortunate position of having partners, including TRI, where we're cited now, to try and drive translation forward. We have a strategic plan, which I won't bore you with for long, except to say we see our job as being in three parts in the blue, green and yellow rectangles. And the first is to try and make the work of translational research easier. The second is to increase Queensland's research translation capacity and capability, and that's what the seminar series sort of fits into that category. And the third is to actually try and maximise translation. So there's no point in doing a whole lot of work to know what you should do or what you should not do unless you actually do it or do not do it. And so it's that final step. And that's where Queensland Health is such a valuable partner for HTQ. We're also developing two interactive websites. The one of most relevance to this group is the Clinical Trials Hub, which will come online in about September. We're also running a mental health hub. And these, we hope, will be interactive go-to places for anybody with any involvement in clinical trials, including participants. We would encourage you to keep an eye on our website or sign up to our newsletter, where you'll be getting updates for this. But we're hoping that this will be a very useful resource with both local connections and national and international connections about how to do stuff in clinical trials, both investigator-initiated and sponsored studies. We also run the Queensland node of HASANDA, which again is very relevant to clinical trials, which is a mechanism by which clinical trial data can be reanalysed or reutilised by other researchers. So again, this is a terrific resource. The issues around confidentiality and etc. have all been sorted out behind the scenes. Queensland Health again is a good partner here. And so if you are interested in analysing data from trials that have already been run, or if you are running a trial, we would strongly encourage you to ensure that your data is actually included in this national network of data. So a bit later, I'll ask our guests to introduce themselves a bit more fully, but I'd like to warmly welcome Professor Craig Rayner, Dr. Michelle Williams and Dr. Mark Lahovey to this evening's events. All three have very significant track records in academia and industry. They bring different perspectives. All three are from organisations which have strong connections to Queensland and Brisbane. So I'm really pleased that they've agreed to participate, and I look forward to their participation. Also, a shout out to Craig, who in discussions with Frank Gannon and myself over the last few months was a stimulus for this session, in that he contributed to our thinking about how we might run this, maybe vented some of his frustrations or his observations, shall I say, about the interaction between industry, government and academia. And we collectively think that the way forward is actually education, hence this series. And again, thanks, Craig, for your attendance, your ideas and your sponsorship. So I just want to set the scene and scoot through some slides. Health Translation Queensland has produced a funding analysis which makes sort of a set of observations, which I've paraphrased here. And the bottom line is Queensland's got 20% of the national population. We do our bit and contribute 20% of our GDP, but we persistently and consistently average 12, 13, 14% of competitive research funding from pretty much any source you can name. So the obvious question is why? And this is explored in the funding analysis. And one of the reasons, which is in a sense quite evident, is that we have a smaller pool of applicants, both in the university and in the MRI sector in Queensland compared to New South Wales and Victoria. By dint of that, we are therefore less connected nationally. We don't have the same number of people involved in national committees just because we don't have as big a pool to supply from. There is some evidence that our applications to some schemes may be lower in quality based on percentage success rates. There's some evidence that there might be lower support for some applications from organisations, industry, government and institutions, and perhaps some less understanding of the broader system. So these were some of the things that contributed to the thinking around the seminar series. From a personal perspective, some overarching considerations are, as much as we may cry about it, the days of generous funding for us to follow our pet interests are long gone. You need to tailor your grant application to the opportunity or your application for collaboration or etc. In my experience, funders are delighted if other folk also want to fund the same work. So if you get some money for something, don't stop there, keep trying. I've never seen any agency or funding agency, government or non-government or industry, concerned about the fact that the work that they are interested in is being funded from multiple sources, because of course you can just get more bang for your buck. We need to understand IP and its limitations and benefits, but don't let it be the tail that wags the dog. And it might come up in discussion that the Australian IP environment is a bit different to most parts of the world, and it is a limitation for interactions where institutions, universities, MRIs and government have a different take on IP in Australia compared to most other countries. It's useful, again, especially with industry, to display a sense of urgency, because they have a sense of urgency, and if there is a problem that needs to be solved, the logical thing is to try and solve it as quickly as possible. So that's a useful thing, and feasibility and impact are key components of any interaction, again, particularly with industry. And so this interaction between industry, government and academia is an important one. Central to all three is improved health in the community. So there's a commonality which I think overrides the differences. Obviously, industry is by and large profit driven. Academia is by and large papers, grants and rankings driven. And government, of course, has a major issue in trying to deliver services with restricted, always with restricted resources. But the overlap is much more important and much, I think, more strong than the distinctions between those three groups. So I would argue that industry is absolutely central to what we do. And a way of exploring that for a bit of fun would be to perhaps contemplate from a health perspective where we would be without industry. As an endocrinologist, I'm going to start with diabetes. So I'd ask you to turn your front yard into a plantation of goat's rue, which is a little weed that skirts the Mediterranean. And you can boil up some tea, which is full of metformin, which is basically a foundation drug of choice for diabetes. If that doesn't work, grow some apple trees in the backyard, and you can extract from the bark of the tree root SGLT2 inhibitors, which are a new class of drugs for diabetes. And if that doesn't work, you could grow yourself or house yourself a colony of Gila monsters, which are actually very small, and train them all to spit into your beaker every morning. And from that, you could extract Ozempic, which would help your diabetes and your weight. If you didn't have diabetes but had heart disease, you'd throw the goat's rue away and grow some foxglove and extract some digoxin, and you'd buy yourself a high-performance battery in case you got an arrhythmia. Or if you had cancer, you'd throw the other plants out and you'd grow a plantation of Western yew from which you could extract Taxol for your solid organ tumour. And if that failed, poppy is the fallback option for pretty much any of the conditions I'm describing, and that you could make yourself a bit of morphine. If you had obesity, the options have been around quite a long time. They actually work, but the application is the problem. And if you had a dodgy knee or hip, in the old days, you might want to chop down one of your yew trees to create a stick or a crutch or a wheelchair, compared to modern day options. And this is a little bit fanciful, but the bottom line is As far as I'm aware, every drug, vaccine, device on the market is there because of industry development and support. I don't think we have an intervention anywhere, maybe North Korea, I'm not sure, that is completely government supported. So we cannot get away from the importance of industry and commercialisation. And I would counsel you all, which is, I know I'm preaching to converted, which is why you're here, but this is a key component. So again, introducing our panel, and I'll ask them perhaps if they could come up and we'll all sit at the front. Craig is Director of Regional Centre for Respiratory Medicines and Tropical Diseases with Moderna, which has a strong Australian interest. Michelle, Strategic Partnership Lead, particularly around clinical trials for Sanofi, which, as we all know, is flavour of the month here in Brisbane, with a huge co-investment with government, Griffith and UQ. And Mark Lahovey from Stryker, where they have a major lab on the Royal Brisbane campus, and Richard Wares here situated. This is the second of 3 seminars, and a quick teaser for the 3rd seminar, which is coming up in a month. And there's a barcode there that you can, a QR code that you can use. But again, our website will give you updates as we go. So I'd ask the panelists to come to the stage. The format is each will be asked to self-introduce with particularly interesting things and why they've bothered to come and or been interested to come, and a couple of hot tips that they would like you to keep as takeaway messages. And then it'll be an open Q&A format with both questions from the floor and from online. And Katrina Katz down the front is going to curate the questions from online. So perhaps we could start with Michelle.
Okay. People hear me now?
Yeah.
I think that's better. Well, hello. It's a concentrated audience. I was kind of contemplating getting everyone to move down one, but I probably don't want to do that, right? Anyway, hi, I'm Michelle. I'm the Strategic Partnerships Lead at Sanofi. We're actually housed here on level 7. If you've never met us, you should probably come by, drop by and say hello. I think I've met some of you in the audience. And then what was the question, John, that you wanted us to kind of like, well, what do I do there?
In terms of interaction with industry, which could be contract, could be collaboration,
Yep.
could be funding, it could be anything. What are your hot tips? What are the mistakes you might see? What are the attributes of a really good interaction? And 2 or 3, and we haven't orchestrated this, and I'd be very pleased if the same hot tip comes up from more than one source, because that suggests that it's, there's a common thing. So over to you.
Yeah, in terms of our hot tips, what we've kind of learned is actually a lot of communication and conversation. I suppose as an industry, we kind of don't do grant applications. I'm not looking for 10 pages of what you need to do and all of your background. It is really in terms of consultation with one another. And that way means that we're kind of doing a lot of collaborations of late, as well as a lot of, fee-for-service work. So anything there in terms of the capabilities here to kind of enrich your capabilities and the values there. Obviously, in terms of working with us, is to work in some of our priority areas. So I work in the areas of vaccines predominantly, less so in our pharma business. So yeah, all of our priorities are going to be more in terms of that vaccines and the infectious diseases line. So I think in terms of communication, that's been something that we've learnt a lot of, and it's in consultation and building that trust and that bridge. So that's one hot tip. And I think, John, you picked up on one, which was the values. When we're looking at proposals, it's what is the health outcomes and the values from that extension from your work. Your work, a lot of the times we're seeing is very scientific, which is great. Our scientists love that. They love to see it, and they love to kind of dig in deep and really understand it. But then from a general perspective, of when we're kind of looking at expressions of interests, we're kind of looking at, well, what does that mean from a broader perspective from the health? So that's one thing that you already picked up on. So I thought that was really, really good. And the third thing I think for us is those really milestones. So we are very driven. I think, John, you were saying that as well, in terms of milestones, which you're going to deliver throughout the project. What does that look like? What are the timeframes? And that's what we're working towards. And in kind of those collaborations, well, we need to set that out really clearly. Because yes, we know in terms of experiments, things are going to go wrong, things are going to be delayed and whatnot. But understanding from an outset what that kind of looks like, what that plan looks like for us to devise, have mitigation points. We like to risk mitigate as well during that time is really essential for us in those project proposals.
Thanks, Michelle. Mark?
Hey, tomorrow.
Sure. So I'm Mark Lowe, the Digital Health Manager of the Stryker R&D Lab. I should tell you just a little bit about the R&D Lab. We are a public-private partnership. We are located right on the campus within the Hurston Innovation Precinct on the Royal Brisbane campus. We spun out of a successful public-private collaboration out of Melbourne, and Queensland was the beneficiary of Stryker coming to the area. So within the lab, we have a number of different work streams, and my efforts are focused on digital health projects, which, as you can imagine, have a pretty wide range of potential applications. We also have active research projects in robotics, in software and imaging, which we call enabling technologies, and a bit of manufacturing as well, with an emphasis on additive manufacturing. So we've really covered our bases quite well in terms of the emerging technologies that are finding their way into healthcare. If I have 3 hot tips of groups that are, or personnel or groups that are looking to collaborate with us, the first is just an understanding of the potential schemes that we can be co-applying for grants with. So we are, to some extent, somewhat inundated with inbound interest. And it's very helpful for us to have had a little bit of the legwork already sort of teed up to understand that the potential research we're talking about can target a specific scheme. So I would say that the scheme in mind and the grant that we would potentially be co-applying for would be very beneficial. The second hot tip would be just having some understanding of the commercial potential for the research. So I can speak more in depth, but we are very much constrained by commercial upside. As John mentioned at the beginning, we are an industry facility. There always needs to be an accompanying business case to any of the research that we're pursuing. And often that business case is anchored in Stryker-specific business units. And then the third piece is just timelines. So just understanding that academic and industry timelines don't always coexist. There's often great pressure for us to deliver product into the market, and commercializing medical devices or pharmaceuticals and molecules it's no easy task. It doesn't happen overnight. But there's always commercial pressure for us to deliver. So those would be the 3 tips that I have.
Thanks, Craig. Great. Yeah, and look, lovely to be here. So Craig Rayner, Moderna. I have a bit of a checkered past. I think quite a few people are aware of my checkered past, but it's involved sort of being in large pharma, in clinical practice, biotech startup, entrepreneurship, and then finally at Moderna. So it's given, I guess, a whole variety of perspectives. And so I'll lean now into the Moderna situation, which has some different kind of lenses that we apply to how we engage with the ecosystem here. So, firstly, I'm the director of the Regional Research Centre for Respiratory Medicine and Tropical Diseases. What is that? It's Moderna's R&D centre in this region. What's its purpose? It is trying to deliver against the global R&D strategy within Moderna, and doing something unique, which is part of the global R&D fabric. And that is Australia is really seen as a translational centre of excellence. Infectious diseases is a very large part of our portfolio as well. So in addition to the translational work, early translational work, early clinical evaluations, there's also an interest in countercyclical clinical trials in the immunology and also infectious diseases space. So those areas are seen to be really, really core for what the Regional Research Centre does, and therefore colours the kinds of interactions that we have with the ecosystem. So, so that means capability-based partnerships is a really important thing for us. It's not necessarily just about trying to find the science and assets from a typical scout finder kind of model that many pharma have. So we really are looking at not building large labs and phase 1 units in Moderna. We're actually looking at engaging and collaborating in capability-based partnerships. And of course, where there is really amazing science, no one has a monopoly on innovation, and so we certainly look to identify opportunities to collaborate with exciting science that's just based on its merits rather than its geography. So if I was to think of 3 tips, I think my colleagues up here have outlined 3 with each of them I would absolutely endorse. Perhaps I'll try and add a little bit extra. The first thing I would say is seek first to understand. The fact that we're having this conversation is brilliant. So thank you, John, for organising this. And the more times we can create these collisions so that you can understand what happens in industry, what is prioritised in industry, how industry development decisions happen and why, the more you get exposed to the talent in industry and how complex product development actually is. And the more industry is exposed to your talent and your brilliance and that sort of stuff. So the more collisions we have, the better. So I think that my first thing here is seek first to understand and try to maximise those opportunities for these collisions. The second thing is don't think transactionally. And we've already heard the word trust come up. There is many great opportunities to collaborate, great science and things that are out there. But at the end of the day, what makes great collaborations are actually relationships. It's relationships between people, and that is built on a foundation of trust. So seek first to understand. I think take a strategic rather than a transactional look. And I guess the other thing is I can't even think of a third one. I might just leave it there. Is that all right? Yeah.
Perfect. That's great. All right. Thanks very much. The floor is open for questions, both. We've got a roving mic. Let's try. So, yes, go for it. Well, just wait for the microphone.
Eloise Keefe, Griffith University. We often hear about the disparity between academic and industry timelines, and I think everyone has experienced that. Do you have a message or an insight into what you see tends to slow down academic activity? And presumably that's the direction. Is it that people aren't focused enough? Is it that they don't have enough resource? Is it that they don't plan well? Is there something consistent that you see drives that issue?
You could probably take a stab at that. I think, first of all, it's a fairly broad question. And I think the nature of the timelines is different depending on the type of solution we're referring to. So for devices, broadly, devices can be capital infrastructure, it can be implants, there's different risk levels and so on. Even within a company like Stryker, we're known for orthopedic implants, but we make products really throughout the health system and throughout the continuum of care. And so academic research, particularly at the discovery phase, is exploratory and is not tied to timelines, and nor should it be, frankly. It should be allowed to be given its proper course to thoroughly make discoveries. As you get further down the development pipeline and the development process, the process becomes a bit more rigid. And so there's very set toll gates, and there's design reviews, and there's TRL levels, and there's project managers that have their well-being tied to the delivery of those markers and so on. So the pressure sort of ratchets up as you need to actually, the rubber sort of hits the road, and you need to actually create something that can be used in the world. So I think that it's perhaps not an issue of awareness of the differences. I think that there are just there's just different pressures coming in, and I think even in the the diagram that John showed, the endpoints of what each respective party is interested in differs. And we certainly see that at Stryker Lab, where we have partners in the clinical world, in the academic world, and in the industrial world. And it's this beautiful cacophony of folks trying to find their own specific interests. I might see how that maybe changes within the drug world, but certainly for devices, I think it's part of it also, part of the pressure, frankly, also is based on external factors. So certainly within the digital health world, the field is moving so rapidly that the need to maintain a competitive edge is really driving a lot as well. So there's almost a mismatch between discovery at the academic side and industry.
Yeah, I guess we're kind of in the drug world, right? A little bit different. I guess we at Sanofi at the TSH, we're probably working more that kind of early stage, the discovery stage. So in terms of interesting things that we find is actually scientists love to put in a lot of what they'll deliver. And we kind of almost have to have that, and that's coming back to those conversations of, can you deliver that in that time frame? So I think we have to pull back a little bit. I think it's amazing that they have all of these, things that they want to do, but is it kind of tenable is kind of the one thing that we're seeing a stream, probably the majority, always having to kind of come back and go, let's rework that. What's actually doable within the 1 year or the 2 year, whatever the grant time frame is, as well as the budget, with all of the kind of things that we're trying to do here, with all of the technology advances, it's actually, they're really all quite expensive, right? So you kind of got to really think back to, well, what do you really need? And I know that technology is great. It does show you can go in leaps and bounds in terms of your outcomes, and it's like the hot thing to use, right? But from a commercial perspective, I guess maybe you may not be aware, but when we're developing products into the pipeline, when we're doing our endpoints, which is what goes into the dossier for our products, we're not using like the most, outstanding latest technology, because what we need to show is that it works, it's efficacious, has less side effects. So we're going back to the fundamental of some of those kind of like flow cytometry, ELISAs, etc., which I know here as scientists, you're like, what? That's so old. Like we don't do that stuff anymore. But us in the world of developing, therapeutics, we're still in that because we're showing, and we don't need to use the latest technologies to be able to show that our innovations work for therapies. So that's a little bit of what I've learned.
If I could pick up a couple of threads. So I think that collaborating with a scientist at the project level, I think, the concept of shaping a proposal together and getting the right experimental setup with the delivery and delivery against timelines is really important, because we're trying to mitigate risk. And I do agree that sometimes there's a lot of extraneous stuff that's tacked on around it, where really you could answer a critical question by being a little more focused. So I think that's one of the great opportunities to collaborate and sort of work, all right, well, what is really critical to answer that question on the time that we have? And the reason why we have the time is because of the stage gate reviews. We need to mitigate risk because it's going to inform a decision. So these are the kinds of things that are really, really important. So I think a lot of that can be managed with the investigator and ensuring that they're bought into the project teams also with industry, because if you're just sort of floating off in the abyss and you're not hearing the project manager and all those, and you're not sort of seeing that, you don't really understand the context of why your experiment's so important. So again, I think that's the seek to understand piece. But one thing I'll say, if we think about timeliness, one of the things that just gets me all the time, it's like smashing my head against a brick wall, is the commercialization officers and contracting. Is just, I've had a situation recently where I've had situations where we've started fellowships and it's taken 6 months to get through a contract to get people started. I was that close to basically saying we're done. Yeah. We have had examples where we've invested, we have had an agreed project with a brilliant researcher, right, who's just there, just wanting to get started. And by the time we have navigated the contracting process because of, how can I say, misperceptions in value that's created at such an early stage, and really what, claims of needing to get 50% royalties on some product, I exaggerate. But the point is that that project, because of reprioritization internally, was canned. So who wins? So if I think about the timelines, one of the biggest opportunities for the investigator, I think working with the investigator to shape the proposals around the delivery, I think works well just as a cross-functional team. But I think it's some of these systematic aspects with the institutions which are the bigger impediment. Just you can imagine having 2 or 3 of those experiences with one institution. What's the likelihood that you're actually going to even work with the best person in the world in that institution? Pretty low.
If I could maybe add a personal anecdote. When I started to sort of engage with industry a lot, including a couple of spin-out companies, there was this new sort of concept of actually stopping doing an experiment, go, no-go decision points, and not the academic sort of principles. If I do it in a slightly different way, it might work next time. And so that compresses your timeline incredibly, because the killer experiments are the crucial ones that you focus on. The clutch experiments, as the US might call them. But it is a different, which I think it has informed my academic research incredibly well. So there's a huge synergy in taking on some of those industry philosophies around doing your work and applying it to the academic world as well. Yeah, great question. Paul?
Thanks. Can I bring us around to some of the disconnect between academia and industry? Certainly in the past, I think, wasn't that long ago, the innovation cycle in academia was over here spinning the wheel and spitting out papers and promotions and all the rest of it, as you put up on your slide. And industry was out here developing products. And occasionally there'd be some feed through. But the connectivity wasn't, apart from some rare examples, connectivity wasn't there. There is much more of that now. And industry is engaged, obviously, still in that pulling along the translational pipeline of a particular product, getting it through those hoops and doing it in a timely manner. But industry is also more engaged in the R&D section. So, there's genuine collaboration between industry and R&D, the academic R&D. But I guess that there comes a point when there's the challenge of, how much of that R&D is part of the blue sky stuff and how much of it's actually targeted towards, an end product. I mean, there's a lot of lip service has been for some time now around, you can't translate if you don't innovate. You've got to have the ideas before you can go through and translate. But in fact, virtually all of the NHMRC grants I've written over the last 2 decades have had a discrete endpoint, because that's the only way you get grant. The idea of funding blue sky research to drive that innovation, out of which may or may not come the next product, is becoming less and less. So back to my original question, that's a bit of a waffle and a roundabout way of asking the question: how do we maximize that new wonderful relationship we have with industry, between academia and industry, in that R&D space that can foster the innovation cycle, as well as bring out the products from that innovation cycle? It's a challenging question, because I can't see myself exactly what the answers are, but how do we actually set up an ecosystem in which that can happen more often?
I can take a first stab at that if you like, Paul. Look, I think it's well, it's not easy, and it's not easy. But where I think it does come down to is this concept of people and trust, and trying to remove out what I would consider to be systemic or operational impediments, which are all around IP and all these kinds of things, because they generally, I think, they need to be sorted out. So let's assume those kinds of elements are sorted out. I think the way it works is to create more cross-functional endeavours. So it means having folks like in this room as part of a product development team or a product development partnership, and actually bringing their little pieces to the cross-functional team, because that's how it works in industry all the time. You know, you have a cross-functional development team, you'll have various functional representatives, and they will be bringing their innovation from their basic research or their basic research colleagues or their CMC colleagues or others to that environment. So I kind of find that where all the magic happens, it's in the project teams and the cross-functional project teams. And I think if there's more opportunities to get academia and industry to be cross-pollinating in those environments, I think what you see is you see why we're developing things, what the translational questions are, and it forces everyone to think about, well, what innovations might be useful. So if you've got a quantitative person there, they will have been doing some basic quantitative stuff with their PhD students and others, and have tried a different technique. Well, then they can bring that to the problem that they see at hand. If it's a virologist and they've been exploring things and have seen something really emerging of interest, well, and it's innovative, then they may bring a new technique to the team. So I think you did a roundabout question, I'll do a roundabout answer. So I think what I would be saying is, if we can remove the impediments around the IPs and all that stuff, which can be done, we can maximize the opportunity for folks to sit around a cross-functional product development team and go on the journey, meaning that they get to see the why and where it all fits together. I think that what that does, it provides opportunity to then link into the more innovative things through the functions, through the expert functions. That's just a bit of a riff.
I would say, so it's a challenging question. I think that the intersection is really at the unmet need. So we are actively partnered with clinicians, not because, because frankly, we need their perspective. So digital, as you're probably well aware, is filled with all kinds of promises and not a lot of delivery so far in terms of just its broad applications. The unmet clinical need, I think, is a great place to start and to work backwards from there. So the approach to unmet clinical needs can almost come about from two separate angles. One is iterative research. Industrial research can often be very iterative. We have a product, it's de-risked, it's well accepted, it's safe. So to incrementally innovate on that product and make it that much better and hopefully extract additional financial and clinical value out of that product is one journey. The other journey is there's discovery that's happening in the academic sectors that will not just disrupt, but will really bring in a new paradigm of applied technology. So having the industry stakeholders at the table, as Craig's suggesting, will start to immediately again translate some of the potential commercial value for that. So there's the role of communication and collaboration, I think, it really can't be understated. But there always is that the grinding of the machines of each of the institutions that is painful, I think, for everybody involved. And the more that we can do to streamline that, I think, would also speed up timelines.
So I was thinking about that in terms of how do you kind of bring your academic organizations and us as industry kind of together, right? I think about that for the blue sky things, Paul, and just spin it on its head, because it's the seeking to understand, right? And then the push and pull of each of our organizations are going to be different. I'm going to put something out there is, can you develop or maybe start hackathons? You have a question, you bring people in together and say, if you could answer any portion of that, or bring something to the table, an idea, doesn't matter what that is, and we kind of come together, I don't know, over a weekend, whatever that hackathon might look like, because that's when you will start to hear what your industry partners there will say, what are they driving towards? And then your academic partners will also start to generate ideas and then be able to tell us, inform us as industry, what they're thinking and where that, I think it's always context, right? A little bit of our organizations seeking to understand what does that look like. And I think if we kind of like pull together in something that you had a very general question for, and if then you were invited or people are invited openly to kind of come to these, then you could kind of then really speed up that process. And I can hear it's a process of learning, right? And the grind. Then maybe you can expedite that a little bit and do it in that form. I don't know, this is just me putting out something because you guys had such amazing responses. I didn't know how to add to that. So I was like, maybe I'll spin it on its head and do it something a little bit different. I don't know. Does anyone kind of think that that might work? I mean, they put programmers together and do that, right?
You have to keep an eye on our website. We'll be opening up HDQ hackathon.
But there you
You're an
go, right?
ideas, you're an
Yeah.
ideas person.
So
Yeah.
let's
sure.
do that, Paul. We'll do that instead.
I think the other thing, the flip side to the trust is, you know, in a relationship, but it's also sort of getting rid of some suspicion. And, you know, when I went and did my postdoc, I was told, you know, share your data with, you know, whoever. And, you know, and every 3 months it was arranged for me to go down to the Glaxo labs, which were an hour down the road, and just talked about raw data with their scientists and with their marketing teams and everybody else. And I learned about them. In those days, it was a long time ago because I'm ancient, there wasn't the opportunity to do that in Australia. Now there is. You've got 3 multinationals here, right here in this auditorium. You know, 3 people representing multinational organisations. There is no reason why you can't develop a relationship as a PhD student or a postdoc, as I was, and start to share that information. Because, you know, none of these companies are going to steal your idea and run away with it. Talk about risk. That's a risk that they're not going to take. So there's virtually no reason why you shouldn't come in openly, and that's your entree. You either come with clinical expertise, or you come with data, or you come with bright ideas. And we now, you know, for the best ever, have got opportunities in Australia to do that, which is a big shift, a big change. And there's cash, as we heard last seminar. There's venture capital money. There's other ways of supporting some of those things. So, you know, open your lab books, I think.
Could I make a comment on just sort of picking up on that? I give you know, various talks on I guess a career and how to transition between academia and clinic and industry and so on. One of the slides I like to put up is Luke Skywalker and Darth Vader from Empire Strikes Back, sort of up there dueling. And the question that I generally ask the audience is, why have I put that there? And generally, you know, we'll get the PhD students and various folks sort of biting about, you know, industry being the dark side, you know, and you know, having had an academic career and having had an industry career, I try to spend a bit of time kind of trying to dispel those myths. Because, you know, what I would say, you know, given that this is this kind of environment, having worked on both sides, you know, look, I think that there is amazing things that happen everywhere. It's the first thing. There's also some pretty crappy things that happen everywhere. Conflicts happen everywhere. Egos and quashing people's careers and politics happens everywhere. But what I can say about the industry side and product development, which I think is a generalisation, and I have seen this in academia too, but is the cross-functional product development teams. It's a team sport. It really is a team sport. And when you've had the opportunity to work on projects and actually see them realise a medicine that goes out and treats millions of patients, and you realise that that's a team victory, it's quite amazing. So I know that exists in pockets in research and academia. And I know there are some people here who are very, very vocal with trying to encourage Team TRI, Team Queensland, Team Australia, and so on. And I think that that is a laudable task. And I think that's really what we should be trying to do, because I think if we can get to that point, that's, if I was to think of the one thing which is just magical, and I think I already alluded to the project team, it's where the magic happens. So I think if we can do that, Paul, et cetera, I think that would be great for the ecosystem. So.
That's great. The image I have with that Darth Vader is industry hacking off the hands of academia. But
and academia wins, right?
Yeah. Just follow up on that too. We had two people comment on the challenges of industry engagement with universities through tech transfer and the rest. It works the other way too. Academics are challenged by that as well. Maybe a meeting, John, that you could set up is to get some of this networking together. And
I have superpowers, but I have my limits. So.
Just put them in the same room and say they're not getting out until they've resolved it.
Any other questions? Yep, sorry.
Hi there, Simon Cashin from UQ. I'm not sure if I should reveal my checkered past, because I used to work in a commercialisation office and now I do contracts. So I don't know if that makes me a double problem child.
No, you're the solution.
Well, I'd like to think that we are, but I suppose it just, and I share your frustration, and it is equally frustrating on our side too. Like I don't want to see a contract sitting on my desk for 6 months, 8 months, even longer. And my clients, who are the research cohort that I represent, they're sitting there wanting to start work and wanting to spend the money that you guys are sort of dangling in front of them. So they're very keen to get going. So it is incredibly frustrating, and I see things like, we agonise over issues like IP when we haven't even started the project. It's like, guys, we haven't even created anything. What are we arguing about? This might all end up being a feather duster. What's going on here? Are there a couple of things that we could do to maybe just try and at least, start heading down the right path? I mean, I've had a successful one recently, and I think that was because we got the researcher in the room with the sort of the CTO and the technical department from the other partner very early on, and the project was sort of like a co-creation. It wasn't just us coming along and pitching something and say, we've got a fabulous idea, and trying to sort of meld it into what we thought you guys might like. It was very much a co-created thing, and it went very smoothly and very successfully, and led to quite a long runway type project. So is it something like that? Is it other things? I'd just be really interested to hear your thoughts on how we can just, a couple of things that we might be able to do. So a bit of low-hanging fruit that we can just unstick some of this stuff, because I'm really trying to encourage my researchers to engage with industry, with the commercial entities a lot more, get themselves out of this grant hamster wheel and get into some different avenues of funding and certainly translation. So just be interested to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, I can take a stab that the agreement that we have at the Stryker Lab between each of our 5 institutions, one of the founding, so there's a master research agreement, and on the back of that master research agreement was collaborative effort at what effectively is a charter that all groups have bought into. Now, we fight our own battles internally with our legal departments, with our councils that approve projects, with folks that release the funds, and so on. So I think identifying the stakeholder landscape of all the institutions that you're working with, getting their needs of what they need to have to review in a time-efficient manner up front as much as possible, I think would be beneficial. We have what we call project schedule. It is really a working document. So I think previously we've talked about having parties already working with one another to kind of kick things out of the land of discussion and actually everybody rolling up their sleeves and working towards what will become a project that will get endorsed by all groups. The existing framework we has its challenges, but it does streamline facilitation of actual work once everything's approved, and it kind of brings the fight that will happen down the line further up. So you know, we are and all industry parties, I would imagine, are very interested in IP and the commercial endpoint of the research. It may seem somewhat futile up front, but in order to justify the spend on the amount of resources that are deployed to tackle a project, there needs to be a known upside and IP. So I think arriving at a document, particularly for partners that you collaborate with on a routine basis, and getting the industry engagement offices to start to template out some of those documents. I'm sure they exist. I don't know the complexities of your former world, but that really centralizes the discussion and helps legal departments and other decision makers to be able to hit the green light, at least in our experience.
Add to that, I agree. I think so. The whole spectrum. I think, you know, at one end you have the strategic relationships with a large MSA or something like that. It's all been predefined, and you know, a real strategic partnership kind of document where you may then have you know, your work orders that might subtend that. And I think that that's a great end state to go to generally to get to something like that. Certainly my experience is that it would be with a strategic partner where you're looking at expending all of that effort, you know, to be able to pre-prosecute this and align. In order to get there, though, to start from a nascent relationship, it's a bit different, right? You know, so that is one where you've probably got a good understanding of the trust. You've probably done a few projects with that group or groups before, and you know, and here you're looking at really being a strategic collaboration. So I think those ones, at least in my experience, don't tend to be the one that you just pick up the phone and on Thursday you do that. So perhaps I'll do is sort of lean into the situation where it might be a new opportunity to try to engage with industry. Mark's alluded to some of the multiple stakeholders that are present. So often that happens between two scientists who recognize each other's work and value, and you know, and they get pretty excited about setting a project up, and that starts, and then it starts to get more complex depending upon the organisation you're with and who's actually holding the accountability to actually sign off on that. So if it happens to be with the CSO, and that little thing happens, well, it can go pretty quickly. If it happens to be, you know, someone else where they need to get internal buy-in, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, it can take a bit more time and involve more parties. So my advice on that side is to understand, again, seeking to understand what is the decision-making process, who's making the decisions and how, because that will sort of temper your expectations a little bit. I think the best project in that situation is a project that starts. And I would try to tailor your expectations to starting a pilot or starting something small, and thinking of, you know, just getting started. Because only when you get started do you actually start to have a track record and build trust. So I think that everyone has an appetite of going, oh, I want it to be $1 million or $2 million. Now, I would say a $2 million project that never starts is not particularly valuable, whereas a $50,000 project that does start, it can be incredibly valuable and set you on that path to doing one of those large strategic ones that we've spoken about.
Could I expand on the great question a little with two sort of follow-up questions? One is, my sense is that in Australia, there's a mistrust of boilerplate contracts, standard ways of doing things. And, I've lost count of the number of times the universities say, well, we won't use Sanofi's MTA because it's bound to be dodgy. We'll create our own from scratch, this sort of nonsense. Every MTA is fine by and large. And then the second question, well, maybe just the boilerplate one first. Is there a role for that? Can that speed up some of the things that we're hearing about here where get on with it?
Look, I'll make a comment about that. Everyone thinks they're special, including me. So but the point is that those boilerplates, and I don't know if it's the same for my colleagues here, is that they generally get accepted, and so you're taking by getting in and trying to redraft something like that straight away, you're positioning yourself versus what usually happens as different and making yourself look difficult. So I would just think about it. It doesn't mean that things can't be enhanced or tweaked or whatever, but generally they've arrived there not because the boilerplate was cooked up over the weekend, but it's probably been cooked up over a decade. And there's a particular standard of practice and expectation that happens out there. So if you want to be the difficult with all the terms, that's okay, but just realise that that's not necessarily what happens most of the time.
That's great. And the second question is the distinction between IP and net commercial return, which I think is often confused by people die in a ditch for their IP without thinking about net commercial return. And in a sense, net commercial return is all that matters at the end of the day. So could you perhaps any of you talk about that, Michelle?
Do you want to say?
Well, I'm not an IP lawyer, but I think I think it
You're
depends.
everything else, though, I think.
Including a minor in gardening for medicinal purposes at the beginning of the presentation. So I think that really for all parties involved, it's what will be the return on commercial effort here, or the return on all of our efforts. So for the commercial entities, we sit further downstream. Where is the upside? What can be commercialized? Where is their value? Just touching very briefly on the boilerplate piece, part of the challenge, certainly with groups like ours, we have active research in different domains. So we can be doing materials research, which is probably more closely aligned with academic materials research. The nature of that contract will look different than a data-driven clinical pilot that involves patient governance and privacy and so on. So those are almost very different buckets, and yet we're trying to apply, in that case, the same boilerplate template may not work. And the funding schemes may have their own standards, MTAA standards and so on. So I think ultimately the interests, I shouldn't speak on behalf of the broader enterprise, but the ultimate interests in IP are that commercial return. And certainly with the right agreement, the commercial returns would be shared with your partners through profit sharing and downstream return. And really the commercial or the industry partner should be the one carrying that forward, since that's where our expertise lies. So that would be a part of any good agreement, a good faith sharing of IP in exchange for downstream return. And frankly, we've heard from some of the hospitals that they don't have interest in IP specifically because they're not commercialization entities. They're interested in finding solutions that work and make things better and make people's lives better and so on, as well as publications and not to downplay the potential for financial return as well, but that's not their primary interest. But that's sort of how we distinguish that. Not sure on your end or not.
Thanks. Okay. Any questions online, Kat? No?
One of the issues with delays is that public health organisations have access to quick legal review.
Okay, thanks. Got another. Oh, Scott. Yeah.
So over the last decade, there's been a real growth nationally and in Southeast Queensland of the SME biotech startup communities. Craig, more nationally for you, but for the others more locally.
What's the role and what's the opportunity of that collaboration with Big Pharma?
I think SMEs come in different shapes and sizes. Some of them could be, I'll give you a spectrum of the ones. Some of them, generally when we talk about SME, we kind of think about people who've generated IP and potentially an asset, or it could be a delivery technology, or equally it could be a contract research organisation with particular skills, or a services organisation, a biomarker lab, a trials unit, someone who's providing digital capabilities to enhance trial recruitment. So there's a whole spectrum of SMEs that are across Australia, and a healthy drug, vaccine, device ecosystem is one that actually has all of those players in it. And they all, in a really healthy environment, they all interact, in their own way. Some of them as a service provider to add efficiencies to the process. Some of them by providing particular competencies, which may not be necessarily available, or technologies. And some of them, yes, with particular technologies that might be applied and might enrich the delivery of a product, or even have IP in their own rights around a particular target. So I guess, Scott, I'd probably say, at least from my side in a Moderna, we engage with many of those folks across that entire spectrum. And they're necessary in order to be able to get business done. From a Moderna perspective, there's about 6,000 people. It's not a big pharma. There's about 6,000 people globally in Moderna, and it does not have aspirations to be a 90,000 person company, which means that it leans a hell of a lot more on the R&D ecosystems and those SMEs to be able to get stuff done. One area which we're hoping will start to really stand up in the Australian ecosystem, national ecosystem, will be improved virtual networks, getting access to patients for doing some more scale here in terms of vaccine trials. From that perspective, there are already a couple of private SMEs that actually do that, but there's opportunity to do even more. So I think I guess what I'd say is that SMEs come in all shapes and sizes, and a healthy ecosystem has lots of them, and biotechs and pharma engage with those wherever across the value chain it makes sense to do so. Some have bigger needs than others. Moderna does, because it tends to externalise probably a lot more than perhaps what others do. Hopefully that's helpful.
Yeah, for sure. And I guess we're kind of the same as Moderna, and probably Stryker as well. So it is all of the SMEs, and I think, like Scott, you were saying, there's a lot of them that are being built at the moment. We're seeing a lot of them kind of pop up. I think you gentlemen will kind of see the same as well. And that's really exciting for us at Sanofi as well, for the Translational Science Hub, is we want to build that ecosystem. So what we want to do is really engage with all of the SMEs, and I think yourselves as well, in terms of building that ecosystem. And what does that mean is, wherever it is in that value chain, if there is a business case for it, for a particular trial or whatever innovation that we're trialing or testing or putting out there, then we'll be able to utilize that. And that's what's really exciting as well, because it's a whole system, right, that really feeds on itself. So us as our organisations, we won't be developing that on our own, because that's not the business, our core business. But we also do realise and see the value of these SMEs as well. And we can't deliver our innovations effectively without them or yourselves, if you are an SME.
Right. Got a question up the back.
Mohammad Mirkhala from QUT. Thank you so much. If your companies are excited in transformative research like you were discussing, at which stage, at which technology readiness level would you like to be engaged? That's my first question. And the second question is, do the inventors, I mean, should they worry about their technology being licensed that not being used to be put on a shelf or not?
So I think it's very program specific with Stryker. So there are some, first of all, some technologies are just more mature than others. So much of the R&D that we do sits within the TRL 0 to 3 kind of earlier stage conceptual evaluation. We do have active grants open in the 4 to 6 range with development and almost teeing up the de-risking and commercial potential of the technology again, which we would then take and hand off internally to our product development team. So we have very distinct R&D and product development functions within Stryker. We also have other groups that sit squarely in the evaluation space and evaluate new concepts for their commercial potential and how well they fit within our broader roadmaps and portfolios and so on. I think the second piece of your question was related to if we don't actually commercialize technology, it's a real risk. Frankly, there's even good technology. There's a lot of good technology sitting on the shelves of probably every industry company, and it's a matter of either prioritization or timing or when strategic marketing groups think we need to fire on certain products and so on. So I think that even if it sits on the shelf, it still has a better shot of being commercialized than not being within an industry company. But I also, can appreciate wanting to pursue your own idea or commercializing your own business to support, creating a commercial vehicle to push your own concept forward.
And Mark, presumably there's sometimes an opportunity to get that IP back into the university or wherever it came from. And in my experience, companies are quite comfortable with that discussion. For whatever reason, we don't want to take it forward, go back, because if it can benefit the community by another route, and that's companies are usually very supportive of that. So I think it's a theoretical risk, perhaps more than an actual one, certainly from my observations. Because companies, it might be a terrific product, but it's just, it strikes in June rather than July, so it's the wrong financial year. So, those sorts of practice. And so in those sorts of examples, there's often really good opportunities to negotiate to go down a different path. So you're not locked in forever.
Might add just two different perspectives. So from the Moderna side, I think just it's quite a unique company, very focused on its own mRNA platform. So a lot of the in-licensing or technology will be of greatest interest is around how we might enrich the platform. So that would be early TRLs. If someone had actually taken their own LNP mRNA vaccine into phase 2 trials and have shown outcomes, I think it's quite likely, and it's on a novel antigen, it's something we haven't done, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I think in all likelihood, that's going to be something which would be retooled using the Moderna LNPs and so on. So in that example, and then I'm going to give a counter example. In that example, there's a sweet spot for where where Moderna would be keen to kind of interact. And it's, if you go too far, then that's not necessarily going to fit well with the platform approach that we have. Flipping it on its head, from a prior life, I was the global due diligence director at Roche in Europe. And so we would look at assets pretty agnostically, small molecules, monoclonals, the whole kit and caboodle. And in that kind of setting, you can certainly be looking at much more advanced TRLs, and there's a lot more risk which has been mitigated and much larger deal sizes and so on. But in those kinds of settings, that tends to be disconnected from a platform, if you will. So it would be the small molecule, a monoclonal, which you'd set up your own manufacturing for, et cetera. Even in that setting, a typical rule that having done many diligences is you would have, with many biotechs, they'd come in and they may believe it's a phase 2 asset and they may have their launch year in, I don't know, 2028. Pretty much universally, you could sort of discount a phase. They're really phase 1. And you've really got to knock 2 to 3 years off their launch. So I guess the point is that different pharma, different biotech will have different appetites for different TRL levels, and you've got to kind of appreciate that. And some of that will be really determined by the nature of the company and the platform.
All right. Well, on that, thanks very much. On that note, we might close. We're a little over time. For those in the room, we have an opportunity outside for some further discussion with the panelists and others. Thanks again very much to the 3 panelists and to our sponsors. I think it's great questions, good interaction, and thank you very much to the online audience as well for hanging in there and being part of it. Thank you.